So before I get into this, it's worth mentioning that I am not a master of perspective, and the sheer scope of perspective is insane. There's an entire branch of science, perspective science, that gets into how and why perspective works the way that it does, being an illusion of 3D reality and all that. There's all kinds of equations and so many resources out there that you can go to study perspective science if you're feeling it. You definitely don't need to know all of that to make effective use of it, but it could definitely help you down the road. So just bear in mind that you could do a bunch of research into perspective if you're feeling it. For this exercise today, we're pretty much just going to use a pencil, an eraser, some paper, and a ruler or a straight edge. So if you don't have one of those, pause the video, go grab a ruler or a straight edge, the edge of a book, something that's straight and has an edge. And we're going to try and talk about this. I'm going to do my best to explain. We're going to mess around with it a little bit. Don't worry about getting the lines perfectly straight, and don't put too much pressure on yourself, because we're just playing around here just to get a feel for it. Before we do though, let's bust out a warm-up real quick. I will do just draw like a little cube, all loose. And then throw like a little pyramid on top of it. And then, I don't know, like some kind of little disc. Just to give you an idea of, get something on paper, get kind of a feel for some balance and stacking. You're getting a little bit of overlap practice here. Even shade one side of it. I guess I'll throw something like this because it would definitely be tipped over. Even shade a little corner of that. Yeah. Okay. Perspective. So we'll start with the horizon. The horizon can be a bunch of things. You'll hear it referred to as the eye level, and it can definitely represent where your eyes are at versus like your height. It also represents the horizon in a sense of if you're standing in a huge field with no mountains anywhere in sight, off in the distance, eventually your sight ends. And where that sight ends, you'll see a completely straight line. So you have a horizon. You just draw a line like this. Now, the reason the horizon works the way it does on paper is because we evolved on a world with an up and a down. And we've spent so many millions of years with an up and a down that anytime you put a straight line like this in the background, it really gives your eye the idea of distance. How far away something can be. It's also where the ground meets the sky. So you can use the horizon to give you a sense of where you're standing and really create a feeling of distance. And I'll show you how you do that. So draw a straight line, use a ruler, use, whatever you can to just throw one down. And then you add some vanishing points to it. So before I get into explaining what vanishing points are, let's just mess around with it a little bit. Put an X right in the middle of your horizon. Your vanishing points are always on the horizon. And then you want to take your ruler, and from this vanishing point, from the spot in the middle, you want to draw a straight line radiating outward. Multiple straight lines. And you'll notice that these aren't perfectly straight because I'm not using a ruler or even any of the tools here that allow me to draw straight lines. I'm just throwing something down to explain it. All right, now you have all these lines radiating away from your vanishing point, or going from you towards the vanishing point. And then you want to take your ruler and you want to add another straight line. Throw in a few. Yours will likely be straighter than that. And this gives you sort of like, you'll notice it gives you a little bit of a grid. And when you're drawing in perspective, you don't have to do all of this. This is just something to make sure that you get your perspective correct, because perspective obeys certain laws. There are certain rules to the universe, to the world around us, and the way that our brain organizes information. Make sure my microphone is on. And so you'll notice if you go and you stand in the middle of a street, which, I mean, standing in the middle of a road is a bad idea, or if you're standing in the middle of a sidewalk, it appears like the edges of the street or the edges of the sidewalk travel away from you, like you're standing right here, right? This whole area. It radiates, it goes from you, and it seems to, these lines appear to converge in the distance. They all travel in this one direction. And it looks like the street gets smaller and smaller and smaller the further it goes away from you, and then it meets at the end. And eventually, it looks like they literally connect to each other. Now, in reality, they don't. They stay separate forever. This is an optical illusion that our brain creates trying to understand distance. And when you recreate that optical illusion on paper, it reads as distance to your brain, just like it does in real life. So what you want to do is you have this little bit of a grid, right? And you can use this grid to create all kinds of shapes. Really what we're going to do is we're just going to play around on it. Playing around on a perspective grid is awesome. It can give you all kinds of cool ideas, and the more you do it, the better you get at understanding how perspective works. This is one of those things that you just got to grind out. You just have to mess with perspective. Good rules. If it's below the horizon or your eye level, you can see the top of it. And if it's above the horizon, you see the bottom of it. So if it's up here, it's like you're looking at something from below it. And if it's under the horizon, it's like you're looking at something from above. So that's what you want to do. You want to mess around with some shapes on this grid that you have. Yours will likely be much cleaner. In fact, just for the sake of science and making this less messy, I will erase the grid, and then I have like this little tool. So actually, this should be amazing. So this blue line that you're looking at, this is the horizon. This is your eye level. Anything below that, you can see the top of, and anything above it, you can see the bottom of. So just for the sake of messing around, we're going to put it in the middle of your page. You'll notice that there's no grid, so I'm going to draw some straight lines. or relatively straight lines. And because you see where all these lines are heading towards, the direction, it's because I put the vanishing point right here in the dead center. So what you want to do is you can literally just draw, using these points of your grid, draw the front part of a cube. We've been drawing cubes a bunch lately. So just draw a square. And then you notice how these lines are heading towards the vanishing point. Use these lines to determine where the edges of your square, or the edges of your cube that travel into the world, into the distance. This is the direction that they travel. So you're going to draw those off towards your vanishing point, and then you're straight up and down. Unless you're doing 3-point perspective, your up and down lines are just up and down. They're just straight. And your lines that travel left to right, like your grid right here, these are called transversive lines. They always stay straight. If you go and look at a sidewalk, and you look at your feet, and you look off into the distance, you'll notice that the edges of the sidewalk appear to converge at the horizon, but the lines in the sidewalk don't. These lines that travel into the distance are called orthogonal lines. They're orthogonal because you have vertical, horizontal, diagonal, and then your orthogonal always travel towards a vanishing point. These are your depth. Your orthogonal lines create a sense of depth. Okay? So if you're doing a 1-point perspective, you have your up and down, like a cube, your left and right, your orthogonal lines travel towards the horizon, and then bam, up and down, left and right. Okay? And you can use this to create all sorts of different shapes. You can make like really tiny rectangles. Like if you're going to make a table, right? If you're going to make a room, you can use this to design rooms. You can use it to design entire cities. You can use a perspective grid to design a city with very little effort. And then, so you think like, because you're making this rectangle right here smaller, this little one, that means it's going to have less volume. And now it appears like, oh, that these ones right here have more volume. There's more area. This one's definitely more narrow. And then if you're gonna like, right, you're looking at this grid, and it gives you, just if you follow these, if you just follow the lines that travel towards your vanishing point, it can give you the base for a pyramid. You can use a cube. That's a good way to explain it. You can go like this, right? Like you're going to make a wall. And then you follow your orthogonal lines. Okay. And you notice how, because you're standing here, like you're looking in the distance, and you're looking at the beginning of a wall, you can see this part of it. And you can see the face of the wall. But the edge that travels far away from you, you're not going to draw another thing like this. It doesn't look right. You wouldn't be able to see it. It's out of your line of sight. And so what you want to do is you want to play around with your grid. Take your grid, and you can even put straight lines above the horizon. Okay, and so just like if you're looking down on something, and you have a square right here, you can see the top of the cube. Right? If it's in the sky above you, draw a square. And then draw the parts that go off into the distance, going towards your vanishing point. And if you notice, if it's dead center, then you're likely not going to be able to see the sides of it. But if it's way here off to the side, you're going to be able to see the bottom layer right here, and this face, and this face. Okay? And the more you play with this, the more you'll get an understanding of what I'm talking about. And when you really start doing it and you really start messing with it, eventually it becomes like second nature. You can just go minimize. You don't even need the grid all the time. Eventually you just use the grid to check your perspective. You'll draw a city, you'll have an idea for something, and you're like, something doesn't exactly look right here. I need to try to figure out why. And then you grab a piece of paper, you draw the grid across it, and you figure out, like, how did I butcher this? How did I get it wrong? So when you see someone, when you hear me talk about, like, how do you draw a cube from any angle, right? I'm so stuck drawing the same exact cube that I don't know what to do. I can draw this, I can draw a square, and then I know, like, oh, this line goes this way, and this line goes this way, and then you draw a line here, and then they connect, right? Look, I can draw a cube. But as soon as someone's like, yeah, but draw it from a different angle, everything falls apart. And that's because you've memorized how to draw these lines, but you haven't thought about vanishing points or perspective. And so you can imagine in your head, like, I'm going to put the vanishing point over here. And then you know, because of drawing grids, that a whole bunch of imaginary lines radiate away from this vanishing point, right? And so you can go, I'm going to draw a square. Because if the vanishing point is up here, that means the horizon is up there, because your vanishing point is always on your horizon. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to draw the lines that come off the cube towards the vanishing point. Bam. You're like, oh, what about up here? And like you'll find yourself doing like what I just did, where I wanted to make this line right here travel at an angle. Like this one is going towards the vanishing point as well, but it's not. The ones, if it's straight, if they are parallel to each other, like this one and this one, it's always straight. And so the only ones you have to worry about traveling towards a specific direction are the ones that travel towards the vanishing point. So if you'd wanted to do like right? So mess around with your grid. Think about how your horizon is where the sky. Your horizon is where the sky meets the ground. And you will have a horizon even in a house. Because even though it's not in the house itself, it's way off in the distance. If you were to disappear the house and the walls and everything, there's still a horizon off in the distance. And your brain still organizes the edges of the room towards specific directions. So if you're going to be like in a room, the corners of the room are going to move towards a vanishing point. Okay, so now you have walls. Now you're in a room with a bunch of walls. You can shade just some crappy shading to give you an understanding of atmosphere and environment. And anything in this room that's on these walls, like let's say it's a picture frame. You're not going to draw a picture frame like this. You notice that it doesn't look right. It doesn't fit the perspective. That picture frame, because its lines are parallel with the lines of the wall, they're going to travel in the same exact direction as the wall. Bam. And you're like, oh, what about a window? Same exact thing. It's just your basic shapes that we've been drawing, but now the part of it that moves out into the world travels towards a specific point. If you're going to have a table, one of my friends, Anthony Vieira, told me, if you're going to draw something round, it's kind of hard to think about perspective. Well, you can take that round object, a ball, a table, anything, and put it inside a perspective grid. So you're going to have like right? So this is a table. And now you're going to take your circle or an oval in this case. It will almost always be ovular because a circle only looks like a circle if you're looking directly at it. You know, if it's laying flat, it looks like an oval. Okay? So you can use a perspective grid to completely figure out how everything is oriented. It's like, oh, bam. All right. You can use a perspective grid let's say you're drawing a city, you're drawing a building, and you're like, oh, I want a sign on this wall with words on it. Well, you draw the sign, obeying the same perspective that the wall does. Your lines that travel away from you, like this. Those are your orthogonal lines. They head towards the vanishing point. The edges of it, like these are straight. And then you make your writing, you fit it into that. And you make it obey the same rules of perspective. And that's how you get your signs to look correct instead of looking like this. So mess around with the grid. Draw a horizon. Put a vanishing point off to the side. Just put a little X there. Draw some straight lines. Draw some more. And then start constructing shapes. Your cube, the part that's facing you is going to be a square. The part that travels away from you into the distance is going to head towards a vanishing point. Because these ones are straight up and down, the ones at the end that are parallel are straight up and down. And because these ones are flat, the ones that are parallel with it are flat. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, there's a lot to it. And you'll definitely understand more of it the more that you play around. You'll draw something and you'll think like, this doesn't look right. I can't figure out why this doesn't look right. And you'll mess with it until you realize like, oh, okay, it looks right. And eventually you don't even need the grid. You can draw anything from any angle. And then once you have a shape down here, shade part of it. Bam. Think about your horizon. So if you have a sheet of paper, this is your sheet of paper. You can put your horizon in the dead center and then draw all your lines coming off of it from your vanishing point, like this. Or you can put a lot of artists will tell you that you shouldn't put your horizon in the dead center of your paper ever. And in fact, it's called the rule of thirds. You want to do the bottom third where your horizon is. Like this. Or you want to do the top third. Except obviously these all emanate from one vanishing point. And try to be as exact as you can. Okay? At least by exact as you can, I mean, don't put one line radiating from here, and then another from here, and then another from here, and then another. Like, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a dot or an X, and you want those lines to all come from pretty close to the same spot. Because they all converge into the distance where you can no longer see. And then, so take your sheet of paper, put a horizon up here, and then put a vanishing point off to the side. And then do some lines. radiating from that vanishing point. And then do some more lines, horizontal ones. And now you have a grid. And now when you draw a cube on that grid, you go like this. The part facing you is just a regular square. And the parts that travel into the distance travel towards the vanishing point. Bam. And you notice how they're all traveling towards this direction. Take your sheet of paper. Do a few of these. It'll seem daunting at first. After you do a bunch of them, it's effortless. Throw a horizon down. Pick a vanishing point. Let's go to the far right. Draw your lines radiating away from it. Your orthogonal lines. And then draw some horizontal lines, or your transversal lines. And then draw a cube on the grid. Draw a square. The parts that travel into the distance travel towards the vanishing point. Bam. Angles, height, differences. You can imagine okay? Now there's all kinds of other rules here. Typically if something is far away, it is smaller, and if something's up close, it is larger. This is called foreshortening, and I can do an entire video about foreshortening, and I don't want to get into all that. There's all kinds of this is more than enough for the day. Draw a bunch of grids. Draw a bunch of shapes. If you want to draw a shape like this, a cube, then you can draw another cube, keeping in mind that this cube's not going to cut through this one because it's being blocked by the one that's in front of it. Okay, and this is called overlapping. So you can draw a cube like that, a little rectangular wall, and then draw one behind it that comes up like this. When you overlap things, when you put something in front of another, it really creates a sense of distance. You can really tell which one is farther away. And this is one of the ways that you build the illusion. You can tell that this one is in front of this one. If you're going to have a cube like this, right? And then you're going to draw another cube like this. You wouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense, because how are they? They don't occupy the same space, unless it's its own shape and you have some weird type of shape that isn't a cube and instead it comes off of it like this, and then and then it's more like a complicated, a puzzle piece or something like that, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. So mess with horizons. Put it at different spots. Put it in the dead center. You can put it right here. You can put it up here. You can put it down here. You can put a horizon anywhere. It doesn't have to be perfect. I typically stick to the top third or the bottom third. Once you have a horizon, put a vanishing point. Draw a bunch of orthogonal lines coming off of it. Draw some horizontal lines to give you a grid to play around on. Once you have this grid, erect buildings. Put a bunch of shapes. Play with cubes to start off with, and then mess around with other shapes. A pyramid is essentially just a cube with a point. You can put a rectangle and then put a sphere inside that rectangle to make sure it obeys perspective. You can do, if this whole area right here is the ground, which it is, and you draw a wall like this, now you have a wall that goes from where you're standing, all around here, at the edge of the paper, that heads towards the vanishing point. And even this wall, this still a base perspective, and you can draw a little cube on the ground. Draw a square. Draw the parts of the cube that head off into the distance, make it follow these lines towards the vanishing point, always towards the vanishing point. Right? The ones that travel towards the vanishing point are going to be the sides of it, the ones that travel into the distance. But if you're looking at a cube, these sides are all straight up and down. They have nothing to do with the vanishing point. These sides have to do with the vanishing point, so that's the direction they travel. And then because the other side of the cube that I haven't drawn yet matches this side, and they're all parallel to each other, they're also straight up and down. And once you mess with this and you get good at it, it just comes second nature. And then you'll use a grid to test your work. When you draw something and you can't figure out why it doesn't look right, throw a grid down and be like, oh, that's why it doesn't look right. It's not aiming towards the vanishing point like it should. So there you go. There's your quick rundown of perspective. Mess with the horizon. Mess with a vanishing point. We're only going to do 1 point perspective in this one. 2 point perspective is with 2 vanishing points, and 3 point, and so on, to get all kinds of crazy effects, like you're standing on a street corner or you're looking up at buildings from the ground. But for now, horizon, vanishing points, overlap, so you draw shapes behind other shapes, and then just play with the grid. It'll seem weird and daunting at first. You'll put a lot of pressure on yourself to get all the lines perfectly straight away from the vanishing point and all of that. Don't worry about it too much. Just mess around. And that's it. That's all I got for you. So thank you so much for watching.